So I've been rewatching, or rather watching for the first time, the One Piece anime. I've seen clips throughout my time of watching One Piece, but from the beginning now. I've started from the beginning and I'm watching every episode and loving it. And it has me, going back to the beginning, has me reflecting on how Oda deals with the pain and the suffering that these characters experience in their lives. We all know that Oda's great at doing these big, traumatic, intense backstories that really anchor us to the characters, but I want to more focus on how Oda specifically handles a character going through pain and suffering and how he handles the fallout of that as well. So as I started writing up my script for this, pretty much immediately as I started writing up the script for this, Melon actually put out a video on One Piece and trauma. So what I did was I finished writing out all my notes and then I went and watched her video to see if I should scrap everything because it's redundant because it's all been said. And while we do have some points that overlap, for the most part, they're two very different videos. So I did decide to continue on with mine, but I wanted to shout out hers first because she just recently posted a video talking about this as well. It was in my watching through the Baratie arc that got me excited to talk about this topic and just got me spiraling on the incredible way that Oda handles this. So I'm gonna start out by talking about Sanji. When we first meet Sanji in Baratie, he comes off like a brash, ungrateful kid working under someone who infuriates him. But when we see what he went through as a child and the bond he lives for, it changes everything. He's protecting his father figure's dream, the restaurant, above all else. This crap geezer gave his leg and nearly his life to make sure that Sanji was fed, and now Sanji won't let someone go unfed in his care, no matter what, because that was life-changing for him. And he's devoting his life to protect Zeph's dream in return. But once Zeph sees Sanji sharing his dream with Luffy and how his face lights up, Zeph and the crew choose to force Sanji out so that he can pursue his dream. We started off with an impression of Sanji, but when we see the events that informed his relationship with Zeph, his actions and seemingly stupid decisions all make sense for that character. Then on Whole Cake Island, that only amplifies when we see how Sanji's biological father treated him as a tool and rejected him for who he was. A stark contrast between these two father figures that Sanji's had and how that's informed his loyalty and his values. Not to mention how his dream ties not only to his passion, but to his mother. Honestly, I could talk all day about Sanji and how Oda explores his two backstories and how that informs who Sanji chooses to be moving forward, but that's not the point of this video. I want to give kind of a broader view, so I will force myself to move on. But one of the first things that I want to point out about how Oda explores this so well in characters is that he presents a character to us, then he shows us what they've been through to inform who they've become, and that recontextualizes everything that we've known about that character up to this point. Like with Nami, where she's a snake that thieves and tricks and sabotages anyone she comes across to make sure that she gets hers. But then we see a slight shift in narrative angle. We see what's actually happening here is she's fighting tooth and nail for the freedom of her village, all the while believing that they hate her and accepting that fate if it means she can eventually save them. But it's not just that Oda turns things on their head, showing us a character, giving us a deeper layer, and then letting us see them from a different angle. It's also the fact that these characters, what they've been through, is a piece of their story. It's a piece of how they move forward. It's a piece of what informs who they choose to be, but that piece never is what defines them. Like with Brook, who was alone for so long with no one around him but the dead bodies of his crew members and no hope of ever getting out of his isolation either by ship or by death. He was left with nothing but the knowledge that his last remaining crew member and the youngest and most innocent of them all was left familyless and abandoned, and there was absolutely nothing Brook could do to change that. What the heck, Oda? Brook had to be his own source of comfort and camaraderie. He had to keep himself alive mentally so he wasn't driven to complete madness. When we meet him, he's constantly making skeleton jokes to ease the tension. People see him and they scream, so he screams too. Or he keeps things light in the face of terror, because easing the tension of fear and despair is the survival technique that he's relied on. He doesn't want to scare people or for people to feel despair in horribly impossible situations. So his instinctual reaction is to make sure that people see there's nothing to fear by making light of even the heaviest situations. His past doesn't define who he is, but it absolutely informs his habits and who he chooses to be for his crew, because he knows suffering and isolation, and that affects how he acts, just like Sanji. But I'm not done with Brook, because the last thing I want to point out that this series does and how it handles these situations is it takes all this and it relates it back to the reader. Because even if it doesn't look like Brook's story, the feeling of all-consuming loneliness that can take a hold of you to the point that it can drive you mad is something that a lot of people can relate to. And seeing him gain a newfound family and get a second chance at life and his dreams is just as much for the readers as it is for him. Brook was able to stay alive despite being faced with absolute hopelessness. And seeing him go through all of that and still be able to say that he's happy to be alive feels like a catharsis that we, the reader, get to go through with him, but it also provides us with hope too. Speaking of, let's talk about Robin, who shows us total rejection and the feeling that there is no place for you on this earth. But Saul fought for her to understand that she doesn't deserve what happened to her and wasn't born into this world to be alone. And Robin realizing that she wants to live and fighting for her own life is a reflection of what it can mean to a person to have those people who believe in you and who fight for you. Now we have to talk about Ace. I can't tell you how much it affected me the first time I watched Ace's death in the anime. Luffy's voice still cheery but confused as he felt his brother's wound and asked if he was okay. I know that feeling of hearing about someone's death and searching your mind, your entire existence, for some answer outside of what you have just been told, for some reality outside of the one that you're currently living in, as well as how essential it can be to have people to lean on to get you through that. Or Kuma. Joke's on you. You thought you were getting through the video without having to relive more Kuma pain. No. Kuma's story hits on every point that I've tried to point out in this video, all three of the things that I identify that Oda does to make these experiences that the characters go through and how they get through them and how they carry them on their shoulders without being condemned to them, if I can word it like that. He embodies that so well. First, it's the recontextualizing. We see him on the surface, we see his actions, but then we're reminded that everyone has a story behind how they got here, and it may not be what it looks like on the surface. Two, it's that their pain shapes them and informs how they move forward, but it doesn't define them entirely. Kuma responds to the world according to his experiences, but he chooses how he responds and what kind of person he chooses to be in light of those things. And three, their pain relates back to the readers. If you watch this stream, then you've already heard me talk a little bit about how much I relate specifically to the bond, the father-daughter bond between Kuma and Bonnie. I'm not going to go into it here because I don't feel like repeating it, but it's a story. I am forever bonded. I am forever bonded to Bonnie and to Kuma because so much of their story is reflected back in my story. Seeing it in such a raw, visceral, personal, emotional way from the perspective of the father, it affected me. But we can also relate to it in many ways, and that's true of all of these stories that I've brought up and that won't be mentioned in this video is, you know, we can relate back to these characters in so many different ways because there's so much depth to them. We could also look at Kuma's story as someone who's a survivor of terrible things and chooses to take that and to be a fighter for people that they don't have to suffer the way that he suffered. Anything he can do to release people of that kind of pain that he's been through, he's happy to do because that's who he chooses to be in this world. I've brought up a lot of really great characters, but the villains are also subject to this incredible writing. Sometimes in really small ways, like with Moria, who had the same dream as Luffy, and when he lost everything, he crumbled. And his story is told right next to Luffy losing everything, but he didn't crumble. Or you have stories like Doflamingo and Corazon, who had the same upbringing, who suffered the same torture. One chose to define himself by his past, and one used it to fight for others to help them get out of this cycle. The villains and the heroes alike are treated with this nuance where the things that they go through in life, it's something that they shoulder, it's something that they carry with them, it's not something that they get over or get past, it's something that they walk through life with. But do they walk through life to inform how they help the world, how they interact with the world in a positive way or in a terrible way? They aren't condemned to relive or repeat their past, but that is an opportunity. It shows the readers what happened to these characters to inform who they've chosen to be, whether it be a puppeteer who is obsessed with controlling everything, or someone who is trying to rescue kids from falling into the same path that his brother fell into. Naturally, every crew member and near every side character could be explored in this same manner for this video, but my goal wasn't to just cover as many people as possible. My goal was to specifically talk about these 3 points of what I see in how Oda writes his characters and why it's so effective, why it hits us so hard, why we react so strongly to Oda's writing of the characters' suffering and what comes next. So I hope I was able to do that in this video, and if you liked it, then I would love to hear from you. What are some characters that you've personally related to and why, if you feel like sharing that? One character that I didn't talk about in this video that he means the world to me, his name is Todo. He's from the Alabasta arc. I talk about him in this kind of old video, but I just love him so much. And Corazon, who's my #1 top character in the series, obviously. But anyway, I would love to hear more from you in the comments. If you want to elaborate or build on anything that I said here, be sure to check out Mel and T's video if you haven't already. I'll see you again soon. Bye.